Welcome once again. This is Pinnacle Professional College, and today we'll be continuing our series on government external audits. And we've been talking extensively about this topic in our previous lectures. If you haven't seen them, please look at the channel and you should see those videos. Thank you for watching, and let's dive straight into it. So, government external audits and the Constitution of Ghana. We are talking about the Auditor General, right? One of the things the Auditor General should have is that the Auditor General should have access to all books, records, returns, and documents that are relevant to those accounts, right? Just as a normal external auditor will have access to the books of the client, the Auditor General should have access to all the books, records, and returns relevant to those public accounts. Within 6 months of the end of the financial year, the Auditor General should report to Parliament, drawing attention to any irregularities. So the Auditor General should take these records, documents, assess them, and basically report to Parliament on any irregularities or findings, so any significant matters or material matters. Parliament should then debate the reports and, where necessary in the public interest, set up a committee to deal with matters arising from it. So Parliament then has to look at the reports, see the material issues that have been outlined in the report, and then set up a committee to deal with any matters that may arise from it. The Constitution also specifies the rights and powers of the Auditor General as follows. The Auditor General should not be subject to the direction or control of any other power or authority. What does this mean? What does this mean? We've talked about independence, the independence of an auditor, right? So in other words, the Auditor General should be independent. They should not be subject to the direction or control of any other power or authority. However, there's a caveat here. However, the President, on the advice of the Council of State, may ask the Auditor General in the public interest to audit the accounts of a particular public sector or entity. The President may ask, can ask the Auditor General, in light of the public interest, to audit the accounts of a particular public sector or entity or body. The Auditor General has the power to disallow any expenditure by an audited body that is contrary to law. The Auditor General has the power to disallow any expenditure that is contrary to law and may surcharge the amount of any disallowed expenditure on the person responsible for incurring or authorizing it. And they also may surcharge any sum that has not been brought into account on the person who should have brought it into account, right? So the Auditor General basically has certain powers. And one of the powers is to disallow expenditure that is contrary to the law and may surcharge it to the person responsible for incurring or authorizing that transaction. Now let's move on to the Audit Service Act 2000. The Audit Service Act 2000. Now, what's the Audit Service Act? What's it all about? The role of the Audit Service, also known as the Auditor General Department, is now set out in the Audit Service Act 2000. The Audit Service is headed by a board, which includes the Auditor General. We discussed this in our previous lecture. And what are the functions of this board? Number one is deciding the organization structure of the Audit Service. Deciding the organization structure of the Audit Service and the expertise that it requires. So the board will sit down and try and detail or flesh out the organization structure of the Audit Service. They also ensure that the activities of the Audit Service are carried out in accordance with international best practice, right? They also ensure that the activities of the audit service are carried out in accordance with international best practice. Another thing that the board does is they appoint officers and employees to the audit service, right? They appoint officers and employees to the audit service, even though they can delegate this responsibility to the Auditor General, right? Now, we've talked about some of the functions of the board. This act, which is Act 584, the Audit Service Act 2000, it repeats the requirements in the Constitution for the Auditor General to audit the accounts of government and other public institutions, and should have the right to the books, the returns, the records, and other accounting information. However, the Act also makes it clear that in reference to the Auditor General, it also means persons appointed by the Auditor General to do audit work, who are typically members of the audit service, right? So when we say Auditor General, the Act is telling us that Auditor General also means people authorized by the Auditor General to do audit work. A provision in the Act, which is Section 12, also requires the Bank of Ghana to submit to the Auditor General every 6 months a statement setting out the foreign exchange receipts and payments during the period. What are the foreign exchange receipts and payments during the period, and transfers in and outside Ghana? And the Auditor General should then report to Parliament on this statement. So every 6 months, the Bank of Ghana will send a statement out to the Auditor General on the forex receipts and payments and the transfers that are happening in and outside Ghana, right? And transfers in and outside of Ghana. So transfers coming to Ghana and transfers going out of Ghana. The Auditor General should report to Parliament on the statement. Now, let's look at the functions of the audit service. What are the functions of the audit service? The Act specifies the functions of the audit service, right, which is the Auditor General Department. The Auditor General should examine the accounts of government and other public sector institutions, whether the accounts have been properly kept, right? You are checking if the accounts have been properly kept, the public monies have been fully accounted for, and monies have been spent for the purpose for which they were intended. Now, when money is spent, records must be maintained. Records must be in place and must be maintained of every expenditure that is made, right? One of the key things when it comes to public expenditure is what we call value for money. Value for money. And value for money basically has 3 pillars. Number 1 is economy, number 2 is efficiency, number 3 is effectiveness. Programs undertaken by an entity should have regard to economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. So it should seek to achieve economy, it should be efficient, and should be effective in terms of the way resources are utilized, right? Resources should be utilized in an efficient, effective, and an economizing way. In addition to auditing public accounts, the Auditor General should carry out such special audits or reviews as he considers necessary and submit a report to Parliament on each of them. So the Auditor General has to carry out special audits as he or she deems necessary. They carry out special audits as he or she deems necessary. So these are some of the functions of the audit service. Now, let's talk about audits of a statutory corporation. The Audit Service Act includes a specific provision regarding the audits of a statutory corporation or a state enterprise. As part of an audit of these entities, the Auditor General should draw attention to the following things. Number 1 is the profitability, liquidity, stability of the corporation. right? So when it comes to auditing a statutory corporation, the Auditor General should bring attention to how profitable the corporation is, how stable it is, how solvent it is, and how liquid it is, right? Number two, whether there was delay in payment of government portion of any declared dividend. Number three, issues around fraud or losses and the underlying causes should be discussed. Another thing is whether there are any internal controls weaknesses. Internal controls weaknesses. Are there any internal control weaknesses? That's one of the things the Auditor General should draw attention to. Another thing the Auditor General should draw attention to when it comes to audit of statutory corporation is the general performance of the entity. The entity's targets, the entity's objectives, the entity's finances, and whether the entity is using the resources that have been handed over to them in a very efficient, effective, and economizing way, right? So the Auditor General should draw attention to some of these things, which we've discussed. Basically, the general health and well-being of the public entity or the public organization. It's important for the Auditor General or the Audit Service to draw attention to these matters, because these matters are key matters that must be looked at. So this is where we bring this lecture to an end. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do so. Thank you for watching. Please share this with a friend and have a good day. Bye-bye.